Welcome everybody. It's such a pleasure to see you all here today. I know we're going to have a really insightful and thought-provoking presentation from Stephanie, and hopefully a very lively set of questions and discussions in the group. I've just got a few housekeeping rules that I wanted to kick off with before I introduce our terrific speaker. So just a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, the event is going to be recorded, so we would kindly request that you don't take recordings of the event. If you'd like to take a photograph of our speaker, that's absolutely fine, but please don't record the event. If you would like to have access to the recording, you can certainly do that. Because we are recording the event ourselves, if you would prefer that your own recorded image isn't kept, please do get in touch with me at the end of this lecture and we can make sure that happens. Okay. The other thing to let you be aware of is that there is no fire safety drill expected in the course of today's event. So if the alarms go off, we will be making our way out in a somewhat deliberate and serious manner. Hopefully that won't happen. If anybody does need to leave, then you will see that the fire exits are clearly signposted at the rear of the theatre. And if anyone has access support needs to be able to leave the theatre, I will be on hand to facilitate that. In the event of a fire, we have a meeting point which is on Brunswick Gardens right at the front of this building. So we'll just go right outside onto that lovely green area. If you need a comfort break, then we have toilets in this building. They are to be found on the basement floor, second floor and fourth floor for male toilets. The female toilet facilities are on the basement floor, the first floor and the third floor, and then we have a toilet with adaptations located on the second floor. We're going to end this lecture and discussion at 5:20, after which there's going to be a drinks reception in the foyer just outside, and we very much hope that you can join us for some continued discussion on the issues raised by Stephanie's paper today. So I can't, well, some of you do know already, but I can't tell you what an honour and a pleasure it is to introduce our speaker, Stephanie Boyce, today. She is, without doubt, one of the most important and influential figures in the contemporary legal landscape. Her career is distinguished not only by personal achievement, but also by a very sustained, strongly evidenced commitment to improving the profession for others, and also for those who aspire to the professions who we have the privilege of teaching at university. Stephanie's origin story is one that some of us might share, but perhaps not so many. Her route into higher education was by way of an access course, rather than the more conventional academic pathway, and I think some of that may resonate with one or two of you in the room who ended up in the legal profession through a non-linear route. And that experience clearly has shaped her perspective. It's given her a very deep understanding of the structural barriers that can exist and of the importance of widening access to university education and also to the legal profession. Stephanie started her career as a commercial lawyer, a commercial property lawyer, and then moved into areas of corporate and public governance. She served as the deputy vice president, then vice president of the Law Society, and for a long time has been deeply engaged in international legal work. As many of you know, she made history as being the first person of colour, the first black president of the Law Society of England and Wales in its near 200-year history. And these milestones matter, not simply because they're symbolic first, but because they mark a broader shift in what was starting to happen within the legal profession. But Stephanie has been very actively involved in driving forward further change within that profession. And that she's achieved this as a Black woman in a profession which continues to present hurdles in respect of race, gender, and other intersecting factors is something that obviously I know we're well aware of. Her contributions are very widely recognised. If I went through all of your awards and accolades, we really would be here all evening. But in brief, earlier this year, she was awarded a CBE for her services to the legal profession. She's an honorary professor at King's College London. I think we might have to find a way to tempt you up north, Stephanie. She's a recipient of the Paris Bar Medal, and she's recently been appointed as Deputy Lieutenant of Buckinghamshire, and she's been awarded the Freedom of the City of London. What's striking for me about Stephanie's contribution to the legal profession and to legal activism to improve outcomes and the experience of minoritized aspiring lawyers is that she doesn't just represent the change within the legal profession. She's actively driving forward to make that change happen at a speed and at a rate that otherwise I honestly don't think we would see. She's consistently insisted that conversations around race, around equality and inclusion must move beyond rhetoric and into action. And it's probably no great surprise then that throughout her career, she has been such a vocal and persistent advocate for diversity, equality, and inclusion, not just as an abstract ideal, but as a lived reality for herself and for those whom she inspires. And it's precisely because of this combination of activism and engagement that makes her an absolutely perfect speaker for the Pankhurst Memorial Lecture. As Christabel Pankhurst's achievements at this university demonstrate, you know, it's an ongoing and an essential part of our responsibility to reflect on how we can do better, how we can engage more effectively, and how we can make the changes that need to happen. Please join me in welcoming Stephanie Boyce. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for that introduction, and good evening, everyone. So, deeds, not words. Emmeline Pankhurst, her daughters Christabel and Sylvia, and the women who stood beside them did not merely speak those words, they lived them at cost, under pressure, and against a political establishment that told them to wait. And they refused. And in refusing, they transformed not only the law, but the moral imagination of a nation. And to stand here this evening delivering this lecture in Christabel's name is both an honour and a responsibility. It is a reminder that every generation inherits not only the rights that others fought for, but also the unfinished work they left behind. The struggle for equality did not end with suffrage. It was only the beginning of a much longer journey, one that continues in law, in leadership, and in legacy, and the legacy we will leave behind. So when I reflect on my own path from a low socio-economic background, first-generation British household, on a council estate, to standing at the helm of our national legal profession, I carry the weight of both gratitude and realism. Gratitude because doors were opened by those who came before me, and realism because those doors still do not swing as freely for everyone. And the law, my chosen calling, has been my teacher, my challenge, and at times, my mirror, reflecting not just fairness, but also the flaws within our systems of justice and representation. And in the spirit of my personal mantra, every door is open if you push. You persevere until something happens. I have learned that perseverance is not passive. It is an act of defiance. It is the quiet insistence that power must not only be accessed, but reimagined, reshaped, and shared. So law has long been presented as neutral, the steady hand that balances competing interests, protects rights, and upholds order, Yet those of us within it know that neutrality is often an illusion. The structures of law, its language, its traditions, its gatekeeping, all are built atop social hierarchies that predate the profession itself. And when I first stepped into a courtroom, I was struck by its choreography, wigs, gowns, ritual, and at once awe-inspiring, but yet excluding. The message was subtle but clear, that belonging comes with condition, that authority is conferred not merely by competence, but by conformity. I entered the profession believing that if I worked hard enough, mastered the rules well enough, the system would respond in kind. Yet even as progress for women appeared visible in rising numbers entering law school, in women ascending to partnership or judicial office, the underlying structure often remained unchanged. And representation without redistribution of influence is not transformation. It is, in my view, presentation. And legal institutions pride themselves on logic and precedent, but precedent can also become a ceiling, one that confines our imagination of what justice can truly be. We cannot reform the law by preserving only its form. We must interrogate its foundations. Who designs the rules? Who remains unheard within procedural fairness that the law promises to all? And Christabel Pankhurst understood that justice is never given, it is claimed. She challenged both Parliament and the courts with the inconvenient truth that exclusion, even when lawful, is never just. The suffragists and suffragettes transformed the moral imagination of the law by showing that legislation without liberation is hollow. They forced the state to see women not as subjects of charity, but as agents of democracy. And their actions remind us that legal systems evolve not through comfort, but through confrontation. And today in our profession, we continue to face inequalities that the statute book alone cannot erase. Women still make up the majority of law graduates, yet they remain underrepresented in senior positions, particularly women of colour, those from working class backgrounds or those with disabilities. Pay disparities persist, harassment still shadows corridors, and credibility is too often gendered. We teach equality in the classroom, but tolerate inequity in culture. And law, if it is to be the architecture of justice, must become a living structure, one that grows, breathes, and reflects the society it serves. And that means widening participation, not as a philanthropic gesture, but as a professional obligation. It means dismantling bias, not through workshops alone, but through accountability. It means recognising that inclusion is not achieved when women are invited into existing structures, but when those structures evolve to reflect the diversity of women themselves. And when I became president of the Law Society, I felt both the exhilaration of possibility and the discomfort of expectation. So representation, while symbolically powerful, can become a double-edged sword. The spotlight can celebrate, but it can also isolate. I found myself navigating spaces where I was both seen and unseen, valued for breaking barriers, yet scrutinised for every step thereafter. I realised then that the true test of progress is not how the pioneer is treated, but what pathways remain for those who follow. We speak often of the rule of law, yet too rarely of the culture of law. A healthy legal culture does not merely enforce compliance with justice, it embodies it. It recognises that equality is not a technical exercise in policy, but a moral commitment to fairness. And when the system rewards conformity over courage, efficiency over empathy, and performance over purpose, we must ask ourselves whose justice is truly being served. And as women in law, we must be unafraid to name the paradox that the very profession entrusted with defending rights can at times perpetuate exclusion, that our codes of conduct can coexist with cultures of silence, that reforms, while progressive on paper, can ring hollow when lived realities remain unchanged. And to confront this paradox, we must look beyond surface reforms, the deeds that are performative, and recover the spirit of deeds, not words. It is not enough to publish equality statements to celebrate first or to mark anniversaries. Our test lies in outcomes, in the redistribution of opportunity, the reshaping of culture, and the recentering of humanity within the rule of law itself. The law gives us tools, but only when we dare to wield them with courage. And so I return to my personal compass, to push. It is a philosophy born not of success, but of struggle, not of privilege, but of persistence. To persevere until something happens is to resist despair, to reclaim agency, and to insist that systems can change. So leadership in law, as in life, is often described as a position, a title, a chair at the table, a seat in chambers, a nameplate on a door. But I have learned that leadership is not a destination, it is a discipline. It is not something we arrive at once we are appointed, but something we practice every day, especially when the room falls silent, and the easy answer would be to blend in and to say and do nothing at all. And when I stepped into national leadership, I understood that my presence in that role would mean many things to many people. To some, it was proof that progress was being made, that the profession was opening up, that diversity initiatives were working, that barriers were being broken. To others, it was a curiosity, a disruption, even a challenge to expectations. Leadership, I realize, does not simply reveal who we are. It reveals the boundaries of other people's imagination of who belongs. And I often think of leadership in the terms my grandfather might have used. He had little formal education, no professional platform, and yet he led in the way he navigated hardship, raised his family, and taught dignity in deprivation. And his leadership was grounded in resilience, not recognition. The world did not celebrate men like him, but it was sustained by them. And when we speak of women and leadership within the legal profession, who holds it, how it is exercised, and whether it is shared? Too often, leadership in law still operates through inherited assumptions that authority looks, sounds, and behaves in a certain way, that confidence must imitate command, and that leadership must mirror dominance. But leadership stripped of empathy is merely control. And in my own leadership journey, I have learned that authority derives not from hierarchy, but from integrity. It requires listening as much as speaking, and accountability as much as influence. Leadership grounded in justice demands moral courage, the courage to act before consensus forms, to name uncomfortable truths, and to hold open a space for others to keep or to step into their own voice. So when I became president, I did so not as symbol, but as a steward. My task was not to own the chair and occupy it forever, but to widen its reach, to ensure that others could see themselves seated in the future. The constant question I asked myself was this: how do I use this platform not only to represent, but to transform? And that question remains the heart of justice-oriented leadership. Representation matters profoundly, but representation alone cannot carry the weight of transformation. To lead in the service of justice is to make space rather than occupy it, to redistribute rather than centralize, to lift others rather than to rise alone. It is, in essence, to make yourself not the last. And for women, leadership so often comes with a double bind. Courage is mistaken for aggression, assertiveness for arrogance, empathy for weakness. And we demand of women a kind of perfection that we rarely require of men. To be visionary, yet compliant, authentic, yet unthreatening, visible, but never too visible. The legal profession, with its rigid traditions of authority, codifies this tension in subtle ways. A woman who speaks decisively can be branded difficult. A man who does the same is considered strong. Women who mentor younger colleagues risk being seen as too soft, while those who challenge structures risk being called disruptive. I think that's a label that's been attached to me several times. But I have met many women across industry, in the profession, from trainees to senior partners, who carry this invisible burden. They work twice as hard to be thought half as capable. They adapt constantly to fit environments that were never designed with them in mind. And yet every day they lead through competence, compassion, and quiet courage. Leadership that demands conformity cannot also claim to value diversity. If an institution says it wants diverse leaders, but punishes difference, it is not recruiting diversity, it is recruiting assimilation. And to change this, we must shift our understanding of leadership from performance to purpose. We must reward not only the results produced, but the principles practiced: transparency, inclusion, mentorship, and integrity. We must create systems where leading differently is not a liability, but a strength. And this also means recognizing the additional layers women carry: the compounded barriers of race, class, disability, religion, age, sexuality, caring responsibilities. And true equality cannot be measured by the presence of women in leadership roles, but by the conditions that enable them to thrive once there. So one of the most profound lessons leadership has taught me is that no one changes a system alone, that real reform is a collective act. And whenever I have felt the weight of expectation, I've also felt the strength of community, of mentors who guided, colleagues who challenged, and allies who stood beside me when the cost of speaking the truth was high. Leadership, particularly for women and those from diverse backgrounds, must therefore be anchored in solidarity. Not the solidarity of sameness, but of shared purpose. We must reject the myth of the solitary trailblazer who fights alone. Progress endures when it is built not on individual heroism, but on collective resilience. I have seen this collective power in women's networks, mentoring circles, and advocacy groups, spaces where experience is exchanged, not hoarded, and where success is defined by how far we lift others. The suffragists understood this instinctively. Their strength lay not simply in Christabel Pankhurst's leadership, but in the collective defiance of women across classes who refused to be silenced. They linked arms, literally and figuratively, to remind the world that personal liberation and collective progress are inseparable. And if I could redefine leadership for our times, it would rest on three values: authenticity, to lead from one's truth, even when that truth makes others uncomfortable; accountability, to hold power responsibly, recognizing its potential both to heal and to harm; integrity, to act consistently with one's principles, even when no one is watching, to ensure that our words, our decisions, and our deeds are aligned. Integrity is not perfection. It is the courage to be transparent, to admit when we fall short, and to continue striving for justice with honesty and humility. And these principles are neither radical nor new. They are rooted in the idea of justice itself, that fairness requires humility, that equality requires intentionality, and that power, if it cannot be questioned, is not worth possessing. So I will not pretend that leading for change is easy. It is lonely at times. It is exhausting to work tirelessly for inclusion while still having to justify one's own belonging. It is painful to be celebrated publicly while privately absorbing doubts about whether the space you occupy truly welcomes you. But this is why leadership rooted in justice matters so deeply. It humanizes the struggle. It reminds us that change is not a policy outcome, it is a personal cost. It demands stamina, self-care, and community care. And it reminds us that as women, we must learn to lead without judgment of ourselves or of each other. The system is already critical enough, and our task is to be kind without being complacent and strong without being hardened. And true leadership is not about the next promotion or platform, it is about the conditions we create for those who follow. And when I speak with young women entering the legal profession today, I see in them both the optimism and the fatigue of change. They inherit a profession that has improved, but not yet truly transformed. For them and for all of us, I repeat, we push. We persevere until something happens. And when it does, we persevere still until something stays. So legacy is a word often spoken in hindsight. We use it to name what remains after the speeches have ended, after the work is done, a record of decisions, a summary of deeds. But I have come to believe that legacy is not built in reflection. It is constructed in real time, in the quiet moments when no one is there. It is shaped by the choices we make when faced with the question, will I act or will I wait? And as women in law, our legacy is never ours alone. It is layered, the product of the paths others have cleared for us, the opportunities we seize and the pathways we leave cleared for those who will come after. And when Christabel Pankhurst and the suffrage movement marched under banners of deeds, not words, they were writing their legacy, not through comfort, but through confrontation. They were told to wait, to be patient, reasonable, deferential. They refused. And their courage calls us to ask, what will the women of tomorrow inherit from us? Will they find a profession that merely welcomes them or one that empowers them? Will they discover doors that are open but still guarded, or corridors built for genuine belonging? And legacy in this context is not about longevity, it is about continuity. The chain of courage that connects past and future through the choices we make today. And each generation must decide whether to polish the system it inherits or to redesign it for fairness. And the first ensures comfort, the second ensures justice. So law as the instrument of society reflects our collective imagination of fairness. Leadership as its moral compass shapes how that imagination becomes practice. And legacy asks us to think beyond both, to imagine the structures of tomorrow. And when I look across the legal profession today, I see institutions that are beginning to speak the language of equality, but still struggle to live its meaning. Diversity strategies are written, pledges are signed, mentoring programs launched, targets announced. And yet, even as pledges multiply, we have witnessed retrenchment, equality commitments quietly shelved when they become inconvenient, progress traded for expediency. And the lived reality of many women, particularly those from diverse backgrounds, those with intersections of identity, still tells a quieter truth. Progress has been partial, precarious, and in too many spaces, performative. And our task is to bridge that gap between principle and practice, to move, as Christabel Pankhurst demanded, from words to deeds. And this requires what I call a moral imagination of justice, the humility to see our blind spots, the courage to confront them, and the creativity to reimagine power. And such imagination asks uncomfortable questions. What happens when the mechanisms built to deliver justice are themselves unequal? When we measure fairness by access to the table, but not by influence over the menu, when legal aid shrinks, representation narrows, and trust in institution falters, can we still claim that the rule of law stands intact? And our legacy must be a renewed commitment to access to justice, not merely as a constitutional slogan, but as a lived right. It means defending legal aid, broadening entry into the profession, and restoring faith that law can still serve the public good. And for me, that is not abstract work, it is personal. I know what it means for families on council estates to feel unseen by the system meant to protect them. And fairness must not depend on geography, income, colour, accent, or any other protected characteristic. It must belong to everyone. And legacy is not only about impact, it is about inheritance. Those of us who have reached positions of influence carry a debt to repay with purpose the opportunities afforded by the struggles of others. And as we were lifted, we must now lift. And in practical terms, this means embedding equality into the DNA of our organisations, beyond committees, beyond statements, to policies, to remuneration, evaluation, and culture. It means raising new leaders, not in our likeness, but in their potential. It means asking of every decision, who benefits and who is missing from the conversation. A sustainable legacy also requires intergenerational dialogue. The young bring urgency, the experienced bring wisdom, and one without the other risks either chaos or stagnation. And real progress happens when generations collaborate, when the energy for change meets the patience to build. I often tell early career professionals, especially young women, that they belong not because someone allowed them in, but because their presence was always overdue. And for institutions, legacy is measured by the courage to evolve. A law firm, a court, a regulator, a business, each must look at the structures of promotion, pay, and prestige, and ask whether they reflect the equality they espouse. The next generation will judge us not by how eloquently we spoke of fairness, but how concretely we built it. So there is a quiet but powerful image that stays with me when I think of legacy. It is of the suffragettes outside Parliament, holding banners in the rain, and around them stood men in suits passing by, convinced that the women's noise would fade with the weather. It did not. Their deeds outlived them because they acted from conviction, not convenience. And in our time, our protests may look different, not always in the streets, but in boardrooms, policy reforms, and acts of daily resistance. When a woman in law refuses to accept pay inequity, that is protest. When allies confront bias rather than overlook it, that is protest. And each of these acts is a continuation of the same legacy, courage turned into motion. But courage must become culture. If leadership is the engine, legacy is the track that we lay down for others to run on. And our goal must be to normalise equality so that the next generation spends less time proving their worth and more time fulfilling their potential. The unfinished fight for equality for women, for those from diverse backgrounds, for justice itself continues not because we lack ability, but because we too often confuse awareness with action. And to paraphrase the old motto, we have had enough of words. It is time for deeds again. So the personal dimension of legacy is also intimate. It lives in mentorship and encouragement, in the small gestures of belief that tell someone you belong here and your voice matters. I remember clearly the moments when mentors and allies spoke words that anchored me, the professors who saw potential, the colleagues who defended my right to lead differently, the friends who reminded me to rest so I could get up again. Legacy often begins in these quiet affirmations of faith. And that's why I continually return to push. Persevere until something happens. It is not merely a mantra for resilience. It is my model of legacy. Each act of perseverance adds a stone to a foundation that others can build upon. And when something does happen, when change arrives, we must persevere again to ensure it endures. And my legacy, I hope, will not be that I was the first, but that I was not the last. That is the truest measure of transformation. When the extraordinary becomes ordinary, when representation becomes routine, and when equality is assumed rather than debated. So as I draw these reflections together across law, leadership, and legacy, I return once more to the words, deeds, not words. Christabel's fight was for suffrage. Ours is for equality within democracy's own institutions. The forms of injustice have changed shape, but their roots remain stubborn. Our call, therefore, must be as urgent as hers. We must defend the rule of law not only as a constitutional principle, but as a social convenient grounded in fairness and access. Hold leaders accountable for measurable progress in pay, promotion, inclusion, and workplace safety. Prioritise mentorship and sponsorship so that opportunity flows horizontally and not merely upward. Widen the definition of leadership to value compassion alongside competence, ethics alongside expertise, and protect equality from regression, embedding it into law, policy, and professional culture so it cannot be quietly dismantled. And above all, we must persist until justice ceases to be conditional, until structural reform is not a campaign but a culture, until every woman entering law can say without hesitation, I belong here because this profession reflects me. And when I look ahead to the generations to come, the daughters of tomorrow's council estates, the students entering our profession with uncertainty but ambition, I will want them to know this: the fight for equality is not a burden, it is a baton. And each of us has the privilege and the duty to carry it forward with courage, compassion, and conviction. Our legacy will not be measured in titles or honours, but in the equilibrium we restore to justice, the humanity we preserve within law, and the hope we leave etched in every step of progress that follows. To lead without judgment, to persevere until something happens, to act so that at last deeds and words become one. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me at the back? Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Oh, we get to sit down now. Take a minute. So, my name's Claire Fox. I'm the Director of EDI and Social Responsibility in the School of Social Sciences, and we've got some time now for some questions for those of us, for those in the room, and also for those of you who are joining us online. If you want to pop them in the chat, and we'll come to you. So, if you have a question, please raise your hand and wait for Stephanie, who has the mic, to come to you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I thought that was really compelling and very thought-provoking, and it's very much appreciated. As an academic lawyer myself, I was wondering if you could tell us, do you think the legal profession is inherently, as we always hear, traditional, conservative, opposed to reforms, probably more conservative than other professions in your experience? And I was wondering also if you you have made references to the fact that there are many more female students. That's the truth now in law schools across the country, but far fewer women in senior professions. I was thinking if you could tell us your view about access to the judiciary in this country, because I think if I think of my home nation, well, I left it many years ago, but currently what is happening now is we have many more female judges than male judges as a result of the system, which, as you know, is an exam after their first degree. I wonder whether the system here in the UK, even though it gives rise to an absolutely brilliant and very experienced lawyers, but perhaps it's more of an obstacle for women to access to the judiciary afterwards, in your view. Thank you.
So thank you very much for your question. Do I think the legal profession remains steeped in tradition? I can only speak for the parts that I know of, but absolutely. We are steeped in tradition. And of course, I reference some of that, you know, whether it's we're stepping into a courtroom or whether we're stepping into a law firm or, you know, into the profession itself. The way we welcome people into the profession is steeped in tradition. And we absolutely, most of us love that tradition that follows. But there are some things that we have to let go of and we have to move forward with. And some of that thinking around, as I've referenced earlier, some of that thinking as to who makes good leaders. So quite rightly, we've got more women coming into the profession at the junior end of the profession, law schools entering into the profession. But across the diversity piece, something happens in the middle that, you know, that just prevents, and there are a number of studies and surveys that have been done, whether that's care and responsibilities or whether women just get fed up, burnt out, whatever, and just leave the profession. They don't feel welcomed, you know, whatever the reason. But across the diversity spectrum, that is the same. They're just not getting into senior positions. If you look at our judiciary, we still are outnumbered by men, but, you know, this country, it's not so long ago that women could not even have their own, you know, their name on a mortgage, you know, on property, on the mortgage deed, their own bank accounts and so forth. There has been talk over the years as to whether or not we need to take another approach in terms of judiciary, as to how we select our judges. And I've been quite vocal about that over the years, in terms about what I think needs to change. We have got, with our Lady Chief Justice in post at the moment, and we can see the changes that are afoot and a real commitment to diversity and increasing representation across the board. And that is absolutely welcome. And we continue to work with her to ensure that that happens. But we are still not where we are supposed to be. And various surveys have been done, and we've heard things from 100 to 200 years before we get that genuine equality across the board. And that is 100, 200 years too long.
Thank you. Other questions, please? Oh, right at the back, Stephanie. To getting your step count in.
Thank you very much. It's an honour hearing you, and it's very inspiring what you said. It resonates very, very much. What I wanted to ask you is, there's a reluctance amongst people who have fought for equality, particularly within those institutions, to now do away, so continue to fight for equality, but do away with the language of inclusion and diversity. This seems to be quite a trend, and I think we've brought it partly from the Atlantic and whatever's happening across the Atlantic. How do we deal with those people? They are allies after all. They continue, as they say, to believe in diversity and inclusion, but want to tiptoe around it in order to get things done. Sorry to be so honest, but I see this playing out in so many arenas, and it's nice to see that the university's still using the language in its titles. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for your question. Firstly, what I say to colleagues is, we are not, you know, we are the United Kingdom. We are not, whatever is going on across the pond, that is not us. Those are not our values. And of course, we saw in the early days that real rollback on EDI and, you know, the change in language and the capitulation of law firms. And I was quite clear about why we should not be doing that. We've seen that slowly coming back, but not where it was. Too many times, you know, people will contact me for one reason or the other, but they don't have the budgets. We also saw that lots of people got made redundant from these posts. I've seen a couple of the EDI posts coming back, and in fact, you're living example of, you know, one. But far too many organisations who came out and said, so that goes back to my performative point, the tick box exercise that came out and said, we're this, we're that, but yet they got rid of, you know, whole departments that were dealing with EDI and so forth. For anyone who thinks that the problem is solved, it is not. You know, for the most part, because I've been one of those persons that have, you know, was told quite bluntly, you know, we've moved on from EDI, we're doing inclusion now. You know, if the principle behind it remains the same, you know, does it matter to a certain extent what we call it if the work is being done and the principle remains the same? But far too often, people are using it as an excuse to move on to the next thing. You know, I've seen law firms that came out, you know, in 2020, George Floyd, following the George Floyd incident, where they came out and they had, you know, performative statements around targets and what they were going to do to get ethnic minorities into to partnership and so forth. And when you ask for the substance and the detail behind that, they didn't have any. They hadn't even given it a thought, didn't have a plan. So it's all good and well to make statements, and I see that we've slightly rolled back, you know, as a profession on making statements, because there's no point making them if there is no action behind them. So what I want to see, and what I tell people all the time, you know, but I'm meeting with senior partners and so forth, action. You know, what is going to move the dial? Because we're still not where we should be. And whilst, as I say, some of those figures have increased, because, you know, in 1990, I think it was, you know, 700 practicing solicitors were women. You know, now it's over 50-something thousand. So we've come a long way, but we're still not getting where we need to get. And as I say, if you then build in intersectionality, the figures are even worse. So a lot more needs to be done, and we should not shy away from calling it out where it needs to be called out, not in an aggressive and a rude way, but just reminding people, organisations, institutions, that we are not yet there.
Thank you. Other questions, please?
Thanks for the wonderful talk, and I'm sure I can see lots of law students and other students here who have been inspired, I'm sure, by your lecture this evening. I also am an academic in the law department, and I also work in the Justice Hub. And I was really interested in what you were saying about the rule of law and access to justice. And increasingly, we're seeing so less and less opportunity for students who come to undergraduate studies wanting to do those kind of jobs. They want to change the world, they want to work in human rights, and they want to work in criminal law. What do you think the answer is in creating those opportunities in terms of access to justice for the students that are leaving, not just law schools, but with any degree, particularly given that the SQE doesn't have that optionality anymore to do immigration law or employment law that was offered on the legal practice course. So they now only get those core modules again. So just wondering what the answer is to inspire and encourage the students to go into those kinds of areas. So
Absolutely. We have to... we have to continue to talk those areas up. They are vital parts of our profession. In the most part, poorly paid parts of our profession. I know a while back there were lots of academic institutions that were discouraging students from going into those particular areas. The reality is, of course, is that we've got an aging demographic when it comes to criminal lawyers. In some areas, I think the average age is 49, 50, between 49 and 55. Some areas, you can't find a criminal practitioner. But we also have to get society, the wider society, on board. And I've always said this, that, you know, when I came to office and somebody said to me, every single president has done access to justice. What is, you know, theme? What is going to make your time different? My response was PLE, public legal education. I was told very clearly by ministers that there are no votes in the justice system. You know, I was at a legal tech conference last year, falling out on stage with somebody who, you know, they were gloating about how big their AI company was getting and, you know, all the money they were making. And I said, well, as soon as you're making so much money, why don't you put some into access to justice? And of course, you know, he turned and he said, there's no money in that. Why would we put our money into that? And of course, there were a few people in the audience who thought that was very funny and started laughing. And then when I said, you know, which goes back to, we have to remind ourselves, why did we get into this business in the first place? And there are, you know, people who will, a myriad of reasons why people got into this. But most of us got into the law because we wanted to make a difference. We wanted to change lives, to change our society, our communities, and all of those things for the better. So for me, it is absolutely getting the public on board, because it should not have taken, you know, rioting in the streets and early release of prisoners to start to embed the state of the justice system into the public's conscience. So I'm a big proponent of getting law taught in schools, because I think that's a start. But we absolutely need to start talking up these areas as to why, okay, they don't pay so well as, you know, maybe M&As, but they're vital components for us to function as a society, and we need that. Just like, you know, you don't miss something until it's gone, just like, you know, the bin men who've been striking for however long in Birmingham, you know, until your rubbish is not being collected, you don't realise the vital cog that those individuals are in enabling our society to function properly. But we need to start talking differently about those areas and encouraging students. I absolutely encourage you to, yes, it's very glamorous to go into the big law firms and earn lots of money, but equally, they're long hours and you certainly will earn your money. But there are other parts that need to keep our justice system functioning.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah.
Sorry, haven't got my reading glasses today. Just following on from what Claire was saying, really, and being mindful of the students that we've got here today, it was really lovely to hear you talking about the generosity of the community that have been there for you, your mentors, your allies. And I wondered if you could share with particularly our students, how you find the people who are going to become your allies, because that can feel really daunting, can't it? When you're at university, you might not yet have found people like you. So I just wondered if you had any advice for our students.
I think it's a bit different now, because obviously we've got the internet. You know, most of us are prolific users of the internet, and different social media sites, community sites, that you can reach out to people and you can ask. But certainly in my time, I think it was also people who I didn't even know was speaking up for me, advocating for me. And indeed, when I left office and I was asked, you know, Stephanie, what can we do for you? It was exactly that. Continue to speak my name in rooms that I'm not in, which is absolutely powerful. But for those of you who are looking for allies, mentors, and so forth, ask. My mother always says, if you don't ask, you don't get. But, you know, ask someone, you know, will you mentor me? You know, will you speak my name in rooms that I'm not in? If a job comes up, an opportunity comes up, you know, think of me and the contribution I might make. And it might be, it doesn't have to be a formal structure for mentoring or something. It could just be somebody that you call on for advice or something like that. Because even as leaders, and certainly in my time as president and even now, you have your circle of advisors, of influencers who you go to, and, you know, you run something passed, or you say, or you sense check. What do you think about this? You know, how do you think this will land? Am I mad, or is this going to work? All of those things. So reach out, ask. And if somebody says no, don't take that as gospel. Remember, it took me 4 attempts to become president, and I kept going because I believed in the power of my own voice.
Yes. Stefan, here in the middle, green cardigan. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for your lecture. I'm wondering how you hold on to the courage to keep going, because I find myself, I mean, I'm 35, the older I get, the more frustrated I get that the system just doesn't change. I'm in my 4th year of the PhD. I'm not in law, in art history, and I'm in the same demographic as my younger brother, who now owns a house. He has a bachelor's in engineering, and he's going to make more than me when I graduate. And I'm frustrated because even though, my field is filled with women, I mostly don't have to work with men, which I like. But structurally, it's a silo in which I have these like structural barriers to income that are hard to fight. Like I can expect fixed lectureships for years. I mean, people are in those for 6 years running, and they just don't have security and employment, and there's no way to get out of your field at this point. So this morning, I mean, I woke up and I was like, why am I doing this? Is it for the money? Because it's not going to come. But then what options do I have? Switch fields to engineering? It's so much effort just to get back in. So I'm curious. I don't know. I'm frustrated, and like, what are your thoughts?
Well, firstly, can I say to you that, you're not alone in thinking that. There are so many people out there who are thinking exactly that. There are some mornings where I get up absolutely exhausted and thinking, why am I doing this? I could be, I think I said to Kirsty as we were coming over, that, I would probably be in some senior, comfortable position if I had learned to be very quiet. But that's not me. And I think, so how do you keep picking yourself up? It's that bit about the baton. And for me, in those 4 attempts, it was, how amazing would it be if I got there? And the things that I would do to make it easier for others to follow. And what would I do differently? Because that's the whole point. We have a choice that when we get there somewhere, whether it's our politicians or whoever, we have a choice to continue we either act in our own self-interest or we become of service. And it's the difference we make and how we lift others. So that's certainly what keeps me going. And I would suggest that's what's going to keep you going, is that, yes, okay, people often say to me about money, when I got my deputy lieutenant, somebody said to me, do you get paid for that? And I said, no. And they said, well, why would you do it? That doesn't put food on the table. And my retort is always the same, is that, money is not always what's important. It helps because you've got to pay bills and so forth, but it's not always about money. And so you can have I know plenty of people who have nice houses, they have a flashy car, they have it all. But, are they living and, doing their purpose, doing their job with purpose, and loving what they're doing? And I think the difference is, I've always said, if I could do what I could do for free, if I didn't have bills to pay, I would absolutely do it because I love it. And the fact, to see people rising. So there are going to be dark days. There are going to be times where you wake up and you say, is this it? What am I doing? But there'll also be better days ahead, because think about the change that you're going to make when you get there.
Thank you. Thank you. Clet Fagan, Vice President of Research at this university. I wanted to ask you about the Law Society's Diversity and Inclusion Charter, which I have not read in all detail, but it was launched in 2009. And a quick skim of it says lots of targeted actions, but no targets. And while targets don't change the world, I know in the financial sector and I know in other countries and comparative studies, they do accelerate progress. So my question is the Law Society being radical, well, not even radical, effective enough with its charter? And does this profession have a sense or a public statement on which companies are doing best in the way that, for example, the financial services sector in this country has started to do?
So thank you very much for that question. I believe you said 2009.
That's what it says on the website. I did a quick check.
I'll have to check that.
Wrong, and it could be my Google skills. So
It could be, because I had understood that they had published it. That's why I said I hadn't read it. I had understood that a new one had been published, but whatever, the principle remains the same. You heard me reference about targets, or I think I mentioned targets. The difficulty is that, as I say, there were lots of organisations, businesses who came out with X target, that they were going to do X by 2030 and whatever. Those have quietly gone away. There was no substance behind them. Well, there may have been good intention at the time, but when you drill down, there was no substance, there was no detail, there was nothing there. We've had targets, women on boards and so forth. I had lunch with somebody yesterday who spent the whole time telling me about how actually things are regressing, that they're not improving. And certainly when you get to diverse colleagues, that definitely has stalled. So if we have targets with, and I think the point that the Law Society is trying to make is that, and not putting a number on it, is because I think at the end of the day that people or targets should be something that individual organisations, businesses should come to by themselves without the Law Society saying X number of targets. In terms of your latter question, obviously we've got the Social Mobility Index that measures law firms and other businesses, but law firms predominantly dominate the top of that. So Brown Jacobson shared the top, the number one position last year with PwC, and it's and there are a couple of others. In terms of other targets and how they're measured and reported on, obviously the SRA, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, do their own reporting. I don't know off the top of my head who else might do push things out, because there are a number of organisations that push different things out, but I don't know how widely it's acted upon. But we've got the gender pay gap reporting, again with big fanfare that comes out with, but again that has slightly gone backwards in the last couple of years. There's a lot for us to do in our profession, but rather than just labelling it as something else, I hear lots of talk about merit, that people are dressing things up as merits. The rollback from the gentleman's question earlier, rather than EDI, people are talking about merit. We're going to recruit on merit. Don't have a problem with that. The problem I have is that merit is not being applied equitably. And it goes back to people being recruited in people's likeness. Or an example that was shared with me yesterday, that we bring lots of people into, widening participation and all of that. We bring them into our law firms, our businesses, and then we put on all these different activities. And somebody was asking, what do you mean you go in skiing? Because that's the reality of some of our colleagues in this country. They didn't know about skiing. They didn't know about what they should wear or where you go skiing or anything like that. And there are too many organisations that bring people in and they drop them there and do nothing with them. They don't transition them properly, and then they wonder why they fell or they leave early. And we have to be better at that. And explain to people. And, at one point, I had a whole trail of senior partners saying to me, Stephanie, young people don't know how to behave in the workplace and dress and so forth. And then when you ask, well, what have you done to ensure that they, that they behave properly or they address you properly rather than yo bro or whatever it was, of course, they hadn't done any of that. So we're taking people out of communities that perhaps they've never stepped into this other world, you know, going to play golf or anything like that. They've never stepped into that world before, and we expect them to thrive without giving them the tools to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your sharing and your contribution. And I really appreciate that you emphasize on the importance of leadership representation, diversity, and community solidarity for the transformation and justice in law. However, given the current situation of the global world shift, there is the growing trend of fragmenting alliance between women's rights, LGBTQ rights, and immigrants' rights in the UK. Like they suggested restricting transgender and immigrants' rights in the name of protecting women. So I wonder, in such a situation, how to make contribution to the gender equality in law through promoting solidarity instead of a division.
How to promote equality instead of division.
I mean, how to promote the solidarity for the gender equality instead of the division.
Right. I think I've got your question. How we promote, which goes back to the thing that I've always talked about. You know, what is the common theme that binds us together? What is it that we're trying to eradicate? What is it that we're trying to resolve? And I think at times we lose sight of that. You know, regardless of who we are, what we are, whatever, you know, most of us want the same thing, and that is equity, it's equality of opportunity. And that should bind us together rather than divide us. That should be the solidarity that brings us together, rather than the whataboutery and this, you know, group's voice is louder than that group and so forth. Of course, there are different issues that prevail amongst different communities and so forth. But ultimately, what is the underlying theme? What is it that we're trying to address and resolve? And my belief is that when we work together, when we collaborate, you know, when we have those shared values, those are the things that are going to, you know, that we will join in chorus and our voices will become so loud that actually that's when change comes. That's when people have to listen. And that is the solidarity that it would bring about.
Yes, thank you. Just lady in the middle.
Thank you. Hi, thank you so much for your lecture. You said something really interesting near the beginning about, and I think it was about success, where it should be about ability, when actually it's quite often about conformity. And I just wondered, like, just out of interest, how that manifested for you, particularly at the beginning of your career. How did you feel you had to conform? And then secondly, how did you then navigate that line between conforming enough to get ahead, but also being able to change things from within?
Absolutely. I call it the rules of the game. Other people call it the rules of the game. So when I was in office, one of the questions I got asked lots was about code switching. I didn't even know what they were talking about at the time. But let's be clear, all of us belong to a code. You know, whether it's the clothes we wear, the neighborhoods we live in, the friends we keep, you know, and so forth and so forth. We all subscribe to a code. You know, other people had utilized that to be able to pick each other out. You know, for instance, one of the things I was told when I collected my CBE, I was told, you know, wear your lapel because people will just instantly be able to tell, you know, that you belong to that club. But of course, over the years, of course I have, whether you call it assimilated, whether you call it the rules of the game, whatever, to get ahead, absolutely, I have done that. Do I have any regrets in doing that? Absolutely not. Because at the end of the day, as I say, if you saw me in my personal life, that is one aspect. You know, I wouldn't turn up here in tracksuit bottoms and a baseball cap as I would walking down the street, possibly. We all behave differently in our homes as we do outside in our community. So the whole point, as I say to people, if I projected myself in a certain way, there is no way that they would have made me president of the Law Society. As somebody, lots of people said, they wanted somebody who would look good on the international stage. And when we think about people we put as a society in positions of power and influence, you know, again, we're playing into some of those rules of the game. We expect leaders to behave a certain way, look a certain way, and that comes into why perhaps certain individuals do not get ahead as others. But of course, I've played the game. I'm still having to play the game. You know, and I often say to my neighbours, we live out in the middle of nowhere, and it'd probably take the police, I don't know, 30 minutes to get there. They might get there a bit quicker. But I always say that the reason why we're a community, we abide by the same rules and it works because we all abide by the same rules. And the moment we don't, that's when things start to fall apart. And, you know, and so the whole point is that in leadership, we have, you know, we're there for a certain time, not forever, as I've said. We're there because we're custodians, we're stewards of a position. We're there to serve and not be of self-service. And so, absolutely, and there will be people who won't be prepared to play the game, and that's fine, absolutely fine. But I had to do that. There were things when I was president that I had, and there are things now. You know, as deputy lieutenant, I'm politically neutral anyway for the most part, but I can't talk about politics publicly. You know, that is something that I have signed up to. So absolutely, I've had to conform. Absolutely, I've had to change to get, you know, where I've needed to get to. We all have to conform. You have to turn up to class to do your exams and so forth. But absolutely, but when you do that, it's absolutely important that you don't lose sight of who you are.
Thank you. I can't be the only person disappointed a little bit that you didn't turn up in tracksuit bottoms and buzz.
I was tempted.
Next time, the trainer. Yeah. Okay. Other questions? Maybe got time for. Oh, sorry, Steph. There goes your step count again. Just a few down. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, I found your lecture really inspiring. This is sort of similar to the question that was just asked, but I was wondering if you think that it's ever possible to truly sort of enact change from the inside. There's sort of like the question of, would pressure from the outside perhaps be more effective? Would it be easier to change things when you're at the very core, when you're leading things? And do you ever find it difficult to reconcile the fact that you sort of are working for the system that you're fighting so hard to change? Because I think sort of looking towards hopefully a career in law, that's something that I find myself thinking about quite a lot, really.
Gosh, I forgot the first part of the question. My brain was just...
Yeah, so the one part was about the difficulty in enacting change.
Oh, from the inside outside, or from the outside inside. I've done it both ways. So as president, I was inside the organisation, the Law Society, you know, and lots of the Law Society is a huge beast. It is a huge beast to try and turn around. And lots of people said to me, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way it's done. And I thought, and, you know, and I didn't wait for permission. I just got on and did it. Because if I'd waited for permission, I wouldn't have achieved half as much as I achieved. And then when I left office, I had they changed the rules, but for the majority of my presidency, I thought I would have to leave office because they'd extended me so I can take up the presidency. So I thought that would be it once I finished being president, and then the rules became clearer as I was coming towards the end, where I could stay on ex officio on council, but no constituents. And I thought, what's the point? But I was tired at that point. I was exhausted. I had the longest serving president, 19 months, most of it during COVID. You know, I'd had everything thrown at me. And I was exhausted. And I chose to leave the Law Society and work from the outside inside. So I think both ways work. But for the most part, I think it's better, if you ask me, at times it is better to be on the inside trying to affect change. There's a good saying that I won't use, but it's got something to do with yeah. But, you know, and it depends what it is that you're trying to change. And sometimes that will determine whether you're inside or outside. But for the most part, it is better to be on the inside, where you can evoke that change. And sometimes that change is not done in grand swoops. It is done gently and softly. It's by pushing, you know, as I say, you know, as I said in the speech, is sometimes when, you know, that is a quiet act of protest. If we speak up about, you know, inequality in pay and so forth, all of that. But I believe that it works both ways, inside and outside. And I've done it both ways, you know, but it's that passion and that purpose to enact that change. And the second part of your question was...
Oh, no, I've forgotten. Sorry. I was listening.
If you ever find it difficult to reconcile the fact that you're working for the system that you're fighting so hard to change.
So it was a very good question about the difficulties of working in the system that you are fighting hard to change, and the tensions around that.
Well, as I said, when I left office, I was absolutely exhausted, mentally, physically, absolutely exhausted. And going to the question that was asked earlier, there are some times where I wake up and I'm absolutely exhausted, because you're having to constantly repeat yourself, or you're there thinking, you look at other people who are stepping into these positions, who are getting appointed left, right and centre, and you think, well, you know, why am I not in that position? Why am I not doing that? But, you know, as I say, those are some days, but they're not every day. And for me, just to continue to give people that hope, to raise aspiration, to ensure that people can see themselves in these positions, you know, because there are younger Stephanie Stevens and so forth out there who can one day become a leader. I believe everyone has got the capability to become a leader. It's whether or not they recognise it in themselves. It's whether or not the system will ensure that they have the ability to become a leader. And that is not always the case in our society. And that will always be the fire in my belly, the fuel that will keep me going. And some of that comes from my own personal experience. But you just have to keep going. I don't know what I'd do if I wasn't complaining about something.
And
Maybe
on that,
play chess.
what?
Maybe play chess. I
Play
don't know.
chess. Take up golf. Seems
No.
popular with.
Well, no.
So that brings us to the end of the Pankhurst Annual Lecture. Yeah, it's flown by, hasn't it?
Wow.
Please do join us for drinks afterwards, especially if you want to come and have a chat with Stephanie, although don't ask for
Or a
golf
photo.
tips or a photo. Very good.
Yeah.
So please do join us for that. I just want to say thank you very much to Holly and to Stephanie and the rest of the External Relations team for doing such a great job in organising and running this event. And of course, thank you so much to Stephanie for this year's Annual Pankhurst Lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.